Okay, good afternoon, and just thank you for the welcome. So just to introduce myself, I'm Alan. Oh, it's gone already. So I'm a product manager at Verifone. I've been with Verifone about 6 years. We were talking over lunch. That still makes me quite a newbie to the industry, I think. And I've kind of held this role just for a few months, but prior to that, I was technical lead for a team that was developing, or is still developing, Verifone's Android payment application, global payment application. And one of the things that we were kind of looking at quite a lot was the accessibility of that application to all of our different users. So as we just go through, there we go. So as we kind of go through this afternoon, I really want to just give you the perspective of accessibility. Okay. And just kind of, to set the scene for you and just ask a few questions. And we'll want to look at how, when we talk about accessibility and when we talk about security, how those two different viewpoints have to coexist. They need to coexist within the industry. But at times, they can collide. So we'll look at that a little bit. We'll talk about just how this conversation is important, right? We'll talk about why it's quite timely to talk about it now. We'll talk about the landscape in a kind of very global and general sense. And then we'll kind of just look a bit more at what's going on here in Europe right now. And then we'll kind of pick up on just how Verifone as a company, as a vendor, is approaching this problem. And obviously, our solution is not the only solution. There are others around there too. But when we just talk about these points of intersection, challenge and opportunity, what are we talking about? So we're talking about a number of different stakeholders within the payments industry. We've got standards bodies, like we are here. Thinking about the security of transaction data, thinking about the security of cardholder data. We've got merchants, retailers, who, at the end of the day, they want to take payments, and they want to take payments as quickly as possible. We've got the actual customers buying products who want to make purchases, but they want to be independent. They want to be able to do it themselves. We've got various advocacy groups in different countries, representing different groups of people who have different needs. And one of the things that we find is actually they're really good at speaking on the needs of their particular group, sometimes to the exclusion of all the other groups. And then you've got companies like us, the vendors, who obviously want to sell our systems. We want to differentiate. We want to make ourselves stand out. We want to make our stuff easy to use. So as we kind of go through this, we'll look at just different perspectives. And obviously, as these things are, one person's viewpoint doesn't always take into account somebody else's. Okay, so why this conversation matters. Accessibility is a thing. There are now regulations, there's legislation in place in Europe, in other countries around the world, where we have to consider accessibility. It's not an option, it's not a nice to have. We have to be thinking about it. And for us as a company, when we started looking at this, we were really considering initially the needs of those who are blind or partially sighted. And we were kind of very, very much constrained and thinking about secure PIN entry, but for people who can't see so well. But actually, the whole landscape has kind of exploded now, and we are thinking about different people's needs, lots of additional needs. And in Europe, one of the things why this really matters is the European Accessibility Act. So what does that mean? So the EAA was something that's been talked about for a number of years. It came into force actually in 2019. That's when the rules and the regulations were set down. And earlier this year, we hit a point where the enforcement period started. So what that means within the European Union is that all new payment solutions that are deployed have to be EAA compliant. And there's a transition period that runs up until 2030 for existing payment solutions to be upgraded. And the idea of the EAA is to really kind of set a single standard, a set of principles to operate by, but a single standard that actually can apply to everything. And actually, it extends beyond payment. It extends to all consumer devices. But thinking about payments, we're talking about terminals, we're talking about online payments, we're talking about hardware, software, support channels. And actually, the EAA is having influence not just within the European Union, but actually it's, the conversation's extending into other territories too. So just about the EAA, we've kind of mentioned a couple of dates, 2025 this year and then 2030. And really what that means in terms of new devices and existing devices. And that implementation is happening across the continent, but as you would probably expect, it's happening at different speeds in different countries, and different nations have different interpretations of the rules to one another, and then different approaches to how they're going to enforce the regulations. Welcome to Europe, right? And as a vendor, we've had to take an approach of reviewing what the Act says, technically, legally, taking external, legal advice on what it says, and actually then engaging external consultants to really kind of bring their interpretation as accessibility experts as to what the regulations mean, and then as we look at our products, well, where are the gaps? What do we actually need to do to be addressing this? Just again, thinking about the why we need to consider this, and just thinking about actually, when we talk about accessibility, the numbers of people who are involved. And actually, when you look at these numbers, they're quite staggering, right? 16%, 1 in 6 people have some kind of disability, accessibility need. 1 in 4 adults across the EU have some kind of disability. 400 million worldwide have a hearing impairment. Well over a million people live with a visual impairment. So we're not just talking about an insignificant number of people. This is a lot of people who get caught up in this. So with the EAA, there we go. The idea now is that we need to design for inclusion, right? It's not just a bolt-on extra. It's something that we need to design in, and following those principles of making the experience perceivable, right? Making it so that people can understand what's going on, making that everybody can operate what's going on. Again, making it so that people who've maybe got different levels of cognition or different neurodiversity needs are able to operate the terminal and the payment. And actually then making sure it's robust. And that even though we're putting things in, that they're going to survive and they're going to actually then persist into the future. A lot of this really started from in terms of a payment device, payment terminal approach, when we were considering moving from devices with physical keypads to entirely touchscreen devices. And like I said, the first thing we were looking at was secure PIN entry. Obviously, when you've got physical keys, somebody who's partially sighted or is blind can actually feel all of the keys, so they can navigate their way around. When you're touchscreen, that's different. So we then have to think through, well, how can we use the different senses to enable people who've got different needs to access payment on this device and do it by themselves, right? Not having to rely on somebody else or not having to tell somebody else their PIN number. you know, making them independent. So when you kind of think about the different senses, the question then becomes, well, how can we use different visual cues? Maybe for people who've got hearing impairment. How can we use audio cues for people who've got visual impairments? How can we use tactile cues as well? That's something that we're now kind of starting to work our way through. But how can we do all of this without compromising the security of the payment experience? Just talking through, just thinking about Europe a little bit. One of the challenges that we have right now is actually understanding what compliance to accessibility really means. We have the EAA, we have other regulations in other countries. But there's no set standard. There's no set definition of this is what you have to do to be compliant. A lot of it involves opinion of us as vendors, of the advocacy groups, of external assessors, and this is something that we do as a company. We kind of go off out to external groups and ask them to assess our products against their interpretation, best interpretation of the different rules and regulations, and then complete, voluntary product accessibility templates, the VPAT. That's something that exists. But it's not a formal certification process. It's effectively self-attestation or self-assessment. And that obviously gives us no real protection against somebody coming along and says, your product doesn't meet the EAA. That's a challenge that we face, and it's something that we're having just to work our way through as we go. The Act talks about both physical devices and online payments, e-commerce. Not to dismiss the online part of this, but it's generally software. Software is much easier to update and deploy in kind of those kind of systems. When it comes onto the physical payment touchpoints, we're talking about hardware. We're talking about, how do we have to redesign our hardware? Do we have to build extra things in? That takes, there's a cycle time in developing and validating hardware. And then obviously our customers have lifetime cycles of those devices. So it's not a quick process to get a new piece of hardware with accessibility built in out into the marketplace. And obviously then software on those devices. Yes, we can update the software, but again, the update cycles can take time. Elsewhere around the world, the United States has got the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act that covers this very topic. There's other regulations in Canada, Australia. We work quite a lot with Vision Australia as well, India. And then, of course, for me, as somebody resident in the UK, we have the Royal National Institute for the Blind, again, another group who are very vocal, but actually very helpful too in helping to guide us through what makes a product accessible. So just thinking about where the different needs can crop up, but also the impact potentially on security. So for those with sight impairments, we need to have non-visual navigation, which can involve, audio, the device speaking to you, prompting you audio, with audio prompts. But again, you don't want to have a situation where it's reading your PIN out as you type it, for example. Or having overlays over products to help people navigate themselves around, where those overlays potentially, again, could be a security risk. We have to consider those who've got motor impairments, so maximizing the area on the screen that people can touch. One of the things that people consider doing is having random PIN layouts and having the layout of the PIN screen change every single time. That's great for security, but for people who are struggling to find the buttons, that becomes an issue. We can go through, there's others. The predictability of the flow is a really important thing for a number of users. And actually, as you make the flow more accessible, the process takes longer. So are you in danger of hitting timeouts for various operations? One of the ones that's going to hit us all, whether we like it or not, is getting older, right? And it just takes us longer to work our way through, or other temporary impairments. Without kind of, trying to drill down into each one, the point is that actually accessibility is not just about sight, it's not just about hearing, it's about all sorts of different needs. So, we've kind of been talking just about how, adding things to the devices can be helpful to some people, but it can cause a security risk. Adding audio and visual cues, again, we want to make sure that we keep people's pins confidential. So really what we're talking about now is accessibility becomes a core requirement. It's not just an add-on, it's not just a bolt-on. It's something that actually we need to start designing in from day one as we design and build our devices. So just thinking about what we have done, Verifone has done as a company, and obviously, like I say, this is just one approach. We are quite proud of what we have. We think it's, one of the best, if not the best in the market, but that's our opinion, obviously. And really what we try and do, it's impossible to kind of do a full-blown demonstration. But what we try and do here is to think through different aspects of accessibility. And we kind of, over time, we've broken it down into different things, talking about assistance modes, so making it easier for certain people with certain impairments to enter things. So, for example, what you see on the screen, is a high contrast pin pad on a touchscreen device. But we're doing things like adding audio feedback, building headphone jacks and that capability into devices, having things such that when you plug your headphones in, the device says automatically, well, okay, in that case, let's enable all the audio cues and take the user down that path. Having, like I say, high contrast options for people who've got color blindness problems, or have other issues distinguishing between colors. Adding audio prompts, adding vibration prompts now as you start to navigate around the screen. And all of this is kind of just trying to make the whole process more accessible. In addition to the kind of screens, one of the things we're also now trying to do as a result of the EAA is not just think about PIN entry, but to think about the entire payment flow and how can we make that more accessible. And okay, maybe that doesn't cross over quite so much with PIN entry, but it's still something that we are having to think about as a vendor and to build in. So how does that really affect PCI? Today, the PCI standards don't explicitly address accessibility. And actually, when we think about how we have to operate globally as a vendor, the compliance expectations are inconsistent. They remain, that's just the nature of the landscape. And accessibility and security are often handled very separately. One of the things that we're conscious of as we kind of continue to develop and evolve our solutions is to say, well, okay, as a vendor, we might have something in one shop, in one store, and as a customer who's able to use that, that's fine. But when they go to the next store down the road, and they have somebody else's solution, that could be completely different. And actually, that's quite a hard transition for them to have to make. So there are kind of questions just in here. Is there an opportunity to explore what accessibility should look like or could look like within this context. So really, just as we kind of just draw to a close, one of the things that we as an industry need to do is just to, ensure that transactions are accessible as well as being secure. So just as we kind of just kind of come into a landing, but thinking about the way forward, and the previous talk was about mobile payments. Actually, that's something that we're having to think about now as a company. What does a mobile transaction look like when you think about accessibility needs? Again, how do we bring that into our e-commerce solutions? And then again, just as I mentioned, thinking about actually, well, as an industry, is there a way we can make this standardized in some way just to help the experience for accessibility users moving between devices and different environments? So really just to kind of finish off, maybe just to pose some questions for you as the industry. For your particular part of the industry, have you thought about your solutions through an accessibility lens? What does that look like? Have you talked to external consultants and maybe just said, from what we provide, how accessible is that? Are you having these conversations even today? How ready are you? And really just where can we go from here? So that's just me. I want to say thank you for your time. Just thank you for listening. And if there's anything that you want to kind of just pick up on, then please feel free to reach out to us at some point afterwards. But thank you very much.